Hello again, part 5, link services, proxy, API, how you can call upstream services using these things to make life a little bit easier for yourself. In the last video we looked at some of the common issues by trying to call our custom service scenario directly using jQuery from the UI and saw some of the problems in terms of leaking security information and things like that. We're going to build on that this time. We're going to register our service actually as a linked service that we can configure within Sherdo, and we're going to use the proxy API to call it rather than trying to call it directly. So let's switch over to the browser and we'll go and sign in again. And we'll go, just to recap, we've got this custom widget, and if I F12 in the background you can see it is receiving something. What it will do when I reload it, it's receiving something from the service, but if you recall we're also leaking in the sources, we're leaking the URL, the API URL, the custom header and the token, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go into admin and we'll go again into integrations, manage link services, and we'll create a new service. Now, because our service is basically just sending across an API key, we can use this generic shared secret integration type, which lets us do just that. So we'll register one of those and we'll call this, what should we call it? Let's call it our custom service. Custom service, give it any old icon. I'll just put some nonsense in for the description. So the shared secret is going to be, we created this as, I can't remember the shared secret, just so you can see it, we created it as a real API token. We're going to allow it to fall back to the system secret because we're only going to have one registration. The base URL for calling the API is going to be https localhost 7100, and the header that we're sending it in we need to specify, and we said that this was always going to be in a header called x custom auth. Normally it would be in the standard HTTP header authorization, but hey, there we go. We're not going to have a header prefix, we're just going to send the header of x custom auth with the secret in it rather than having a prefix. And I don't need to worry about the team availability and configuration messages because I'm not going to make this available to users. It's just going to be a single service that I register with the application. I do need to turn on the proxy though. If I don't turn on the proxy, it will not work and we will not be able to call through to our upstream service. So I'll enable that and save and close. So what we can do now is we can go to Modeler and we can look at the source again for our custom widget, and this is where we were calling it before directly with the custom auth token and everything that was in there, and we can replace all of that completely and we can call the proxy instead. So because we're calling the Sherdo API and not just some random API, we can use $Ajax, which is the UI framework wrapper around the jQuery methods that will allow us to go and call a Sherdo API and automatically do all the error handling and all of that kind of stuff for us. So we're going to make a GET request, and this time, even though we're going to be calling our external service, we need to go through the proxy. So we're going to go to API proxy. I don't need to remember what I called it. I think it was custom was the name of the service that I've registered. So we're proxying to the custom service, which I've enabled for proxy, and then it's an underscore, and now it's the URL of the API that I want to call on that custom service. So I'll just call API test. We'll just get one of those messages back again. And then when that completes and I get my response, I'll just do what I did before for now. I'll do console.log what the response is. Now, what you should notice there is we haven't specified what the base URL is for the API. We haven't specified any security information. We're just basically calling the proxy API, and it's going to forward that onto our test API, and it's going to look after all of that security stuff for us, etc., etc. Okay, so let's go and run this and see what happens. So I've got my widget here, let's reload. And again, we've got a message back. But this time, when I look in sources and I look at the source for that particular widget, I don't have anything being leaked. I don't even have the base URL of where that service is. It's just basically calling the Sherdo APIs and it's forwarding it on for me, which is pretty good. So what we'll do now is we'll actually make this do something useful. Well, first of all, let's get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. Let's go back to the widget and let's actually make this do something useful. So when it does load and bind, it's actually going to do a request to API proxy custom API, but this time I'm actually going to go to the transactions and I'm going to need an ID. So I'm going to need a variable for the ID. We don't know what that is yet. But then when I get a response, then my response, I'll just log it again for now. Then we can see what the payload is that comes back, and then we can bind it to something. But this ID, what we're going to do for this ID? Okay, so when a widget is instantiated in a portal, there are two ways in which a widget gets instantiated. First of all, it can pass through an ID. So if something else, sorry, not the portal engine, if something else loads this widget and wants to use it, it's going to want to pass you the ID. So we'll specify a default of that of null. Then we take that ID that we've specified and we extend an object called options so that it will either be null from our defaults or it will come from the configuration object that were passed. Now when it's used in a portal, things work a little bit differently. The portal is kind of like in an ambient context. So what we'll do here is we'll say if options.id is null, so I'll just say if it's not options ID. So if I've not passed one, then I'll say options.id equals UI page context, which is the ambient context, dot Sherdo ID. And that will give us the work item ID of the portal that we're presently looking at. Now I can store that against this object, so I'll say self.id equals options.id. And then down here in this model, I'm going to do something in a second. I'm going to make it, I'll worry about that in a second. Okay, so my ID that I'm going to pass through here then can just be self.id. I just need to fix up some stuff on the UI because there'll be a binding error for that to-do message that doesn't exist anymore. And let's go and see how that goes. So this is going to call the transaction API to get a list of transactions for this specific work item. Help if I open the console so we can see what's happening. Refresh. And it's given us some stuff back. It's empty, but it's given us some stuff back. So it's given us the list of rows, which are the transactions, or the 5 most recent transactions. The total row count is the total number of transactions, and the balance is the sum of the delta of all of those transactions. Bit boring though, there's nothing in there, so let's make it actually put something in. So we're going to add a button to this. We'll create a new section, and we'll make it centered. And we'll put a button in there, make it the primary color, just say add new, and when I click on that, I'm going to call add row. Okay, so back in the code that sits behind this, I need to create a new method, which is API demo prototype dot, what did I call it? Add row. Right, so we're going to call a post method now, so we'll just get rid of the issues with the scope of this. We're going to do a post method, so we're going to do ajax.post, and we're going to post into API proxy custom. So again, going through the proxy, but to the upstream service we want to call API transactions. And we want to store a transaction against self.id again. So we're storing the transaction against this particular work item that we're showing the widget for. Then when that happens, we won't do anything except, let's just put an alert in, done. Obviously, you wouldn't do that normally, it's going to look horrendous. But I need a payload to go in here, so I need a request. Now, the request was basically one of those transaction objects that the API is expecting, which consisted, I think, of a folio. So we'll say hello from widget, and delta, I think, was the amount that we want to change the balance by. So we'll say that the delta is £10.27. So we're posting to API transactions in the upstream service via the proxy that's going to do all the security stuff for us and do all the configuration of the URL for us and all that kind of stuff. We're going to store a transaction against my current work item ID. We're going to pass in a request that's got the folio hello from widget and a value of £10.27. And then when it's done, we'll basically just tell it to go and load and bind again just to refresh its view, which we don't have yet, but we are going to put that in a second. Okay, I think that should work. Let's give that a whirl. Okay, so I've seen it going away getting some stuff. It's not rendering anything yet. It's still empty. If I click add new, it says that it's done it. So it's gone and made the post upstream. And now it's pulled back the data again. I've got one row. I've got a balance of £10.27. Hit that again. It does it again. I've now got two rows, £20.54, total row count of 2. So that's all clearly working, but it's still a bit boring. I'm not seeing any of the most recent transactions. So what we'll do is in our model, we'll have a value for balance, which will be an observable because we're going to bind it to the UI, and the balance will be 0 to start with. And then we'll have some rows, which will be an observable array, and that'll be empty to start with. When we do the load and bind, we will then say self.model.balance equals, oh no, not equals, set the observable value to whatever the response.balance is. So r.balance. And self.model.rows is going to be equal to r. I assume rows, let's check, r.rows. Don't need to log to the console anymore. I'm just assuming this is going to work. And then in the front end, I will get rid of this alert danger, and I will put a list in. In fact, no, I'll put a table in. Column for folio. And let's have, what's the other one? Column for delta value. And then on the T body, I'm going to do a data bind equals for each model.rows, which I think is what I called it. I've got a memory of a sieve, model.rows, yep. So I'm going to enumerate the model.rows array, create a row, td, data bind equals, so the rows, the values that come back in the rows are folio and delta. So data bind is just going to be folio, text equals folio. And in here we'll put text equals delta. So that's going to list the 5 most recent transactions, and then at the bottom I will put a balance. Text balance, which is going to come from that observable. Theoretically, that should give us a list of transactions, and let me click add new. Let's see. Okay, I got something wrong. Balance is not defined. Okay, let's have a look what I've done wrong there. Text, it's model.balance, that's why. Try that again. Okay, it looks absolutely terrible, but there we go. We've got the last 2 recent transactions and the balance. If I click add new, it says it's done it, and it goes up to 30. Let's get rid of that silly alert because that's just annoying now. So I'll add a fourth row, goes up to 41, fifth row goes up to 51. Now that API is only returning the last 5, so when I click this, that won't change, the list won't change, but the balance should. There it is, it's going up. Got several transactions. Let's just quickly summarize what we've just done. So we've gone into admin. We've gone into integrations, into linked services, and we've defined a service here called custom service that was using the shared secret provider, which is just a simple API token key, whatever you want to call it. We have configured that with the secret that it's expecting, with the header that it's expecting. We've told it what the URL is. All of this is held within configuration. It is managing anything to do with security. It doesn't actually do anything with tokens, but if it was one of the more complicated authorization flows, it would be managing the tokens for me. So that's all registered on the system as a configurable artifact. I'm then using that in my widget by using the proxy API. I'm not sure if I demonstrated this before, but what I will do is I will just quickly turn off the ability to proxy via this service just to show you that it is benign unless it's specifically switched on. So now what I'm expecting to happen is those API calls will fail because the proxy isn't enabled. And sure enough, proxy is disabled for service custom, and none of my data is loaded because it's just refusing to proxy to the upstream service. Turn it back on. Reload, try it again. There we go, I got my data back, £123.24. Keep adding to it, and so it goes up. Okay, so that's it for using the proxy in the UI. Hopefully you can see that it's pretty straightforward, that it does all of that complicated plumbing for you. It gets rid of things like the content security policy issues, any issues you might have with cores, because you're no longer making cross-origin requests. The browser is still just talking to Sherdo, and it is then Sherdo that's talking to the upstream API, and server-to-server calls are not considered to be cross-origin. In the next one, we'll basically take the exact same scenario, but we'll build it into a custom workflow step, and that custom workflow step will be able to add transactions based upon, I don't know, some phase changes against this work item, which should then also be reflected in that widget that we've just built. But for now though, until part 6, that's it for now. Thank you.